Dr. Gregory Jantz is a best-selling author of over 45 books and the founder of the Center A Place of Hope, voted a top 10 center for depression treatment in the U.S. As the pioneer of whole-person care, Dr. Jantz is known as the messenger of hope. Now the nation's expert on anxiety, depression, substance abuse, relationships, trauma, and PTSD, here is Dr. Gregory Jantz.
Hi, it's Dr. Greg Jantz. As a counselor, mental health professional, entering my 41st year, my goodness. I do want to share about a topic here and I go fast with these. These are just to pack as much as we can in a very short period of time. And I understand and I respect people's time. And there are so many different podcast things that people can listen to. And mine is by design a little shorter. All right. So this has a powerful or potentially powerful influence on our life. And it's I carefully prepared notes for our time today. It's a hidden influence, generational trauma. And you may, or have you ever wondered why specific, like maybe behavioral patterns that you see in yourself or you see them in others, and you go, wait, is this from my family history? Many of the struggles we face today could be generational trauma, whether emotional, relational, even physical, or even spiritual. There's spiritual trauma as well. These can be traced back to our families, maybe our parents, but maybe it's the next generation, the previous generation, and you start to see generational themes when we have that information. Not always. So this isn't 100%, but there are times where there's abuse or addiction. In particular, we do see the generational themes. It's very common for example, alcohol addiction. You see a long string of generations that have struggled with alcoholism. And it just keeps going until at some point, through either divine intervention or recovery or both, or a decision, I'm changing this generational pattern, the alcoholism continues. With that, if it was alcoholism, a lot of other things could be following, like abuse, neglect, etc. So sometimes the pain that we have today is as though it's laid on us, or we feel an oppression that has come from our past. Let me say that again. You feel an oppression that has come from your past. But here's the good news in this. And by the way, there's a fair amount of books that have been written on generational trauma, not a new topic. But I want to look at this from a different position, a position of hope. We are not locked in. We are not, the word I use, bondage. We are not in bondage to our past that has been passed on. And maybe we've learned how to be coping. We've learned whether it's addiction or whether it's emotional abuse, for example. That's another area that we see passed down generationally. Where there's emotional abuse, and maybe never physical abuse, maybe never domestic violence, but there was maybe a lot of power and control through emotional abuse, through name calling, through comparisons, through some anger or rage, and there you are. Today, you're struggling because that created some invisible wounds and bruises but they're there. They are still there today. And then you find yourself doing some of the same things and you go, what in the world is going on here? Because I'm perpetuating the same patterns. All right. The good news is awareness is the first step. And let me define clearly what generational trauma is. Generational, here's my definition, is both emotional and psychological pain passed from one generation to the next. Experiences such as abuse, neglect, I think poverty at times can fit in there, addiction, but there can be a theme, a family theme. And I remember going through some genealogy, and on one side of our family, there was known, for example, alcoholism. There was known that went back a couple generations, and you go, wow. But I did see, and this is one side of my family, where there was a person in the family that broke that chain, and now I see 2 generations free of alcoholism. So chains or bondages can be broken. At times, and I'm going to share my personal opinion, there is spiritual intervention, there's prayer, and I do believe there are those that maybe they grew up in a spiritually abusive church or family, a misuse of scriptures, and there were things going on that really were not right, even sometimes speaking for God, and it's terribly abusive. So I just want to acknowledge that happens as well. All right. Now, maybe even as the original pain or event happened decades ago, it really can, I call it ripple forward. It can ripple forward, and it shows up in how families, and this is what's important, how families communicate, how we've learned to deal with emotions, and how we view ourselves in the world based upon our family's past. Here's why this is important, at least to look at it, go, okay, I don't think it applies to me, but let's look at this. It could, here's some possibilities I made note of. It could help us explain some deep-seated emotional reactions that seem bigger than the situation. Okay, do you have a person, or is it you, where you always find yourself overreacting? Maybe even like a ticking time bomb. Overreacted. And it's a situation that you go, why did I respond that way? Why? My response is much bigger than what the situation really dictates. Okay, number 2. It could shed light on family patterns that have just been hard to break. You look back and go, my parents, that pattern. And if you knew grandparents on either side of the family, or a grandparent, you go, wow, they handle their emotions the same way from what I remember. And we look sometimes for extremes. There's maybe an extreme of anger, or an extreme of avoiding emotions. You can kind of see the extreme patterns easier in a family. Emotional abuse. That's one that families tend, that's why I wrote a book years ago, Healing the Scars of Emotional Abuse, because we see emotional abuse patterns in families, and they call it normal. Well, that's just the way he is, that's the way she is. But you see this pattern that we have labeled, well, that's kind of just normal, and we make excuses for it. All right, number 3, it empowers us to respond. So if we have an awareness of generational trauma, it helps us respond to that in a healthy way, instead of repeating this cycle. So often we're just repeating cycles. I do talk about some of this in my book, Triumph Over Trauma, because the trauma from the past, and I do believe, by the way, there is triumph. I believe it is a difficult decision to make, but in the right hands and addressing the issues of the whole person, there is triumph over trauma. And that's also why this is my little commercial break, the workbook, to help us kind of walk through this over the next 12 weeks. And how do I revisit hurt without losing my mind? And even how does forgiveness maybe fit in, and those kinds of questions. All right. Now, here's a couple things as we look at generational trauma. It's not about blaming your family. It's about, that's really true. If we just stay stuck in blame and we develop a critical spirit, that does not promote healing. A critical spirit, blame, will make us emotionally sicker. And we will be filled up with unforgiveness will be filled up with blame that causes us to always be miserable, maybe depressed, always anxious, full of resentments, affects a toxicity that affects all of our relationships. All right, here's just 4 steps to consider. Number 1, we acknowledge the patterns. I wrote down, we've got to honestly look at what's the patterns in my family. And that's where even reading about it and addressing and going, okay, oh, there's a pattern I didn't quite see. And you start to see these patterns. This is something that I have done. Okay, and we just have to honestly look at the family history. Now, sometimes family members are not always, they're judged, and you go, well, your uncle was crazy. So it's not about labeling them. It's about understanding what was the behavioral patterns about this person. We can call them names and say they were crazy, but that's not helping us understand anything. All right. Some of the common signs include, acknowledge the patterns. I've talked about this. Struggle with addiction in any form. Addiction is a intimacy replacer. It is a mood modulator. It is in other words, change how we feel. Addiction is a escapism behavior to temporarily relieve pain or self-medicate. All right, there could be emotional distance patterns or chronic conflict. I'm always in a struggle, trying to be close to somebody, and I always feel emotionally distant, or I'm always in conflict. I don't even mean to do it, but I always find myself in conflict. That's the other one. There could be, this is number 3, unspoken grief or trauma. Unspoken grief. What does that look like? There could be significant loss. A family could have, a generation ago, a family could have lost the family farm, and there was grief passed down. Grandkids that grew up hearing of the great loss of the family farm and a void in their life, a loss of identity. So the family farm is just one example, although a very real one for some. We may look at other patterns of anxiety, depression, a pattern of unhealthy relationships. Again, we're looking for patterns. So we're just acknowledging, what are the patterns in my family and my family tree? Very interesting just to spend a little time and look at it. And I always like to get 2 different opinions. For example, one family member that I had a fair number of questions about. Okay, I asked one person, and it sounded, a little hard, a little biased, but I asked another family member, what was your experience? And so, probably somewhere, I'm looking for themes, but probably somewhere in the middle. All right, so you can create, this is possibly fun to do, an emotional family tree. So do your family tree, who people were, and really, we can only go back, if you're from the Vikings long ago, or in Prussia, which is modern day Russia, and you're from places long ago that we don't know. Okay, so, but we want to look at the emotional family tree from what we could get in the nearest generation. Do you see themes of anger, themes of hurt, themes of addiction, themes of broken relationships, themes of even, I'm going to say it's hard, but is there any theme of suicide, of people taking their life in your family tree? Okay. Number 2, this is out of 4. We got to start with practicing some compassion for yourself and for others. Again, this exercise or looking at generational trauma is not about blame. We got to look at this compassionately to go, help us understand the patterns, both challenging, negative, and the good patterns. Where do I see in my family tree some really good patterns? So we need to look at our ancestors. Probably, for the most part, with some exceptions, were probably doing the best they could. Okay, I'll give you a little bit of flavor for me personally. So I grew up in Kansas. I grew up in a Wild West town called Dodge City. There's a lot of history, a lot of Wild West history, a lot of cattle drives from Texas that would come up through Kansas, and a lot of cowboys, and so there's a theme. And then we look at family tree. Wow, I had some family members that it might have been a little rowdy, and things weren't always great. Okay, so, but I can look and go, okay, what information can I gather? And then it goes from there, it goes to, oh, we have a whole handful of family members that were farmers, lived on the farm, and they grew wheat, and there was some rough times, and there was a dust bowl, and there were loss of lives and loss of farms and livelihood. Okay, I see that. And you look at it from a position of compassion, not about why didn't they do this or that. Don't know. But I know the struggle was real and what they had to go through, and I'm going to have compassion. And maybe there were some really difficult generational patterns that came out of some of this. Yeah. But it's not about blame. All right. Number 3, I can learn new skills. Generational trauma can leave gaps. It does leave gaps in our emotional skills, how to have healthy communication, how to have healthy problem solving, how to process emotions, how to not live by our emotions that are controlling everything. And so we can relearn. This is the great part. I can relearn healthy communication. I can relearn how to deal with anger, fear, guilt, shame. I can relearn these things. Even if I don't think I can, it's all taught skills. And I can learn how to do appropriate boundary setting. Boundaries, what's that? I can really begin to get healthy with this. I can learn emotion regulation. What's that look like? How to properly process emotions so they're not controlling me. How not to be so easily hurt by everything that comes up. How not to let anger take me down a river I don't want to go down. How not to let hurt destroy me. How to deal with anxieties, fear, and worry. How do I do that? So those are all skills that can be taught. And we can learn and we can practice new ways. In fact, we've got, counselors and certain groups that are all about how to relearn skills or how to learn skills that maybe I never had. All right. And there are good resources for this. And generational trauma does not have to be a curse. So often we go, well, that's my past. This is where I am. This is what happened to me. And we're treated as though it's a curse, that I'm in bondage to all the negative and nothing good can happen. And this is what some people will even say, this is what I deserve. All right. Here's what we need to do. This step number 4. We got to create new traditions. One of the most powerful ways to break a cycle is creating new healthy patterns. I'm going to go and I'm going to learn what is a healthy communicator. When I have something going on that emotionally feels overwhelming, what do I do with it? How do I communicate? And I can also learn to in a way, celebrate my emotions. I'm identifying them versus letting them destroy me, control me, give me depression, fill me with anxiety. And I can reestablish and create really, truly new family traditions. And there's a part of this, once we get a little ways down the learning curve of this, and I would encourage you to look at some of the skills of DBT, and find something such as the workbook and begin to work through new skill development. But I have to have an awareness. I got to dive into the trauma, and I got to move on from there. All right. Now, really, even small, what feels like small changes, maybe having a regular family time where we share gratitude about one another. One family meal of the week, we go around the table and share 2 gratitudes about each person. Begin to change it up. Begin, for me, look, I have to do some things to keep my mind renewed. Here's my 3x5 cards with, if it's an affirmation, if it's a scripture, if whatever it is, it's a reminder that renews my mind, right? You're going to say that. Go outside for a 20-minute walk. Say that affirmation out loud. All right. I'm just saying, we can change patterns. I mean, 41 years, I see people's lives change for good. I know patterns can change. All right. Generational trauma. You may feel like it shaped you into something you don't like, but it does not. This is what, because I've seen people's lives change. It does not define who we are or our future unless we give it permission to do so. So here we go. Acknowledge the patterns. We're going to have compassion as we look at things and look at ourselves. We are going to do all we can to deal with trauma, both known and unknown. And we are going to build new skills. I'm just held up my books as just a place to start. And by the way, no book is a cure book. No book has all the answers, but it's a framework and a structure to begin the process. All right. And we can create new, healthy patterns. Just some thoughts as you look at generational trauma. Get some new information. Start there. So whether it's the book, whether you go online and take one of our tests at aplaceofhope.com, aplaceofhope.com, click, I think it says test, and there's several that pertain to this topic. They're confidential. You can take them, you'll get a score and look at different symptoms. So it's just one place to start to begin to get feedback. And there are times where I know it can feel generational trauma, post-traumatic stress, toxic trauma can feel so overwhelming that we need to seek support. We need to seek, I would say, specialized help in order to not only dive into it in a healthy way, but in a way that you're going to grow, in a way that you're going to look back and go, I'm really glad. That's one of the things I hear from clients here at the center. I waited too long, but I'm really glad I did this. I feel like a new person. Generational trauma gives us an opportunity to look honestly at our past and create a different, and for me, it's a different God-directed future, is what I believe. There's hope. Hope comes when there's a plan. Get the plan together. Let's begin to take some steps towards healing.